By Byway Media, overseen by the elders of the Chipman Road Church of Christ in Lee Summit, Missouri.
Now, I grew up in the late 60s and 70s. I graduated from high school in 1983, so I would call those formative years the Tupperware era. Now, you know what I mean if you're of a certain age. That was before the Pampered Chef saga, but kind of based on the same idea. Women would get together and they would socialize while oohing and eyeing over the latest plastic container that would hold their leftovers or make their lives more convenient. That was kind of the idea, a little bit more convenient. And it seems to me that it was the era when almost every meal included fruit cocktail or a fruit salad. And it seems this is the era that birthed almost everything could be a salad. And for me, the mainstay in our home was peas and cheese salad. Now, for those of you who have never had the experiences I'm talking about, you should know this was not a salad. It consisted of cubed American cheese slices, canned peas, and Miracle Whip. It was a staple in our home as a vegetable of choice. And I recall at a very young age making that peas and cheese salad. But the truth was, I just never liked it. In fact, I really hate peas. I would try to load up my spoon or my fork with the cheese pieces to overtake the taste and texture of the peas, and that helped, but I soon learned that all that would be left on my plate were the peas swimming in Miracle Whip. It was not a good strategy, but what never crossed my mind was to not take the peas and cheese salad. I always spooned some onto my plate, even though it took all of my willpower to make them go down, and eventually they did, but each of us kids had something like that. And perhaps you did too, but there was no getting around it. There was no negotiating, for sure. There was no arguing to convince that we, really like something better, or that veggies just aren't our thing, or we should be able to just skip that part, or we should be able to do something else instead of that, instead of the vegetable. That wasn't happening, right? I mean, we knew who we were in that family, in that chain. But lately, I began to wonder if we have forgotten who we are in a larger way, as I've heard and seen people negotiate or argue for or against something because of a personal preference in religious situations, not a God preference, as if we've forgotten who we are and that somehow we make the rules. But consider for a moment, if you will, with me, Naaman. I've been thinking about him when these conversations have been coming up. You'll find him in 2 Kings chapter 5. Now, you probably recall that name and who he was, but this scene that God the Holy Spirit shows us is, I believe, a pretty good example of someone who really thought he was all that, and that he could get what he wanted, even if he refused the peas. If you begin reading in verse 1, you cut the background. Naaman was considered to be a great man. He was a mighty man of valor, as they called them. He was an honorable man according to his king, who was his master. He was the commander of the army of the king of Syria, and he was also a leper. And we know that there was no cure for that at that time. But as it turns out, the Syrians had gone on raids and had brought back a young Israelite girl who became a servant to Naaman's wife. And this compassionate girl knew Naaman's situation and told Naaman's wife, if only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy. And so Naaman was told about that story, and he went to the king, who said, no problem. I'll write a letter to the king of Israel. You take gold and as a gift, and you deliver the letter to the king. But the letter said, now be advised when this letter comes to you, that I have sent Naaman, my servant, to you, that you may heal him of his leprosy. But the problem was that the king couldn't do it. That wasn't who the girl told him would heal him. In other words, the king was saying in the letter, I would prefer someone else, someone more important, more to my liking, someone on my level. It sounds like he would prefer something other than the peas, right? But it got worse. And the king of Israel became angry, it says, and he tore his clothes because he couldn't heal Naaman, and he never claimed to. So he perceived that letter from that king to be a threat of a quarrel or of a war. But Elisha heard about it, and he sent a messenger to the king saying, let me come there and I'll take care of it. For this purpose, this was Elisha's purpose in all of this. He said, so that he will know there is a prophet in Israel. Verse 8. That was Elisha's purpose. It was more than the leprosy issue. And as you recall, no doubt, Naaman went to Elisha, who did not even come out of his house, but just sent a messenger to tell him to dip in the Jordan 7 times and your flesh will be restored to you and you'll be clean. Well, Naaman was insulted. He was incensed. He was livid. The Holy Spirit describes him as furious. And he said, indeed, I said to myself, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and heal the leprosy. Are not the Abana and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. Now, Naaman obviously had it all planned out how he thought that little meeting would go, and it did not. Basically, he didn't like the peas. He thought another river would be better, according to him. Another river is as good as another. One river is as good as another. And if one is more prestigious than another, well, all the better. I want to go to the one that pleases me and the one that I think is worthy of my level. And a wise and humble servant pointed out to him, if the prophet had told you to do something great, would you not have done it? How much more then when he said to you, wash and be clean? And so Naaman went to the Jordan, and he dipped not just once or twice, but 7 times, just as he was told to do. And he was clean. And even better than that, when he came up, Naaman confessed, indeed, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except the God of Israel. Verse 15. Now, I thought about Naaman recently as I was having a conversation with someone who pointed out things about the Lord's worship that were, or that are, confusing to others and kind of makes or breaks the differences of whether someone might attend a worship, the Lord's worship. Well, really the point was that the person was saying was that there's some things that are displeasing to others. Mainly, like no musical instruments are used in the worship assemblies as we sing praises to God, teaching and admonishing each other using our hearts as the instrument, as the melody. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 19. See, the argument was, well, God doesn't explicitly command us not to, so that's a tough issue to tackle. They really prefer something else than just people singing. Well, those of us who worship as the Church of Christ, we've heard it all before. And some have even written long articles over this that were weird or were odd, and their arguments go something like this. Well, the instruments are just an aid. The instruments make us sound better. It makes us stay on key. And then there's this one. I have the talent to play an instrument, and God would want me to use it to glorify Him. I just know He would. Well, Naaman argued that he was more important than a servant bringing the message to him. Naaman argued that a different river would be much better, more worthy of him. There were some that were so much better than the Jordan. One that he liked and one that was more prestigious would be better. An argument that he knew better, that he should be able to choose what he thought was best. Not Elisha, not God. And so the wise servant's advice? Why not just do what you're told to do? Nothing more. Not a different river. Nothing less, not 5 times, 7 times. Isn't it as easy as washing and being clean? It really is that easy. Even though Elisha didn't utter the words, "Thou shalt," even though there was no command not to go to the other rivers, there was no command to not dip only 5 times. You see, it really was a command if he wanted to be cleansed. And it was Naaman's choice to accept or say, "No peace for me," and walk away. It really was that simple. Just this river, just this many times. Just this. Nothing else. Because he wasn't. We aren't God. And because we aren't worshiping ourselves, I hope. So that means we don't make the rules. We remember who we are. We remember where we came from, too. We remember we were not clean either, without dipping ourselves into the water to touch the blood that saved us. Revelation chapter 1, verse 5, and chapter 7, verse 14. And that is why we humbly worship, completely and fully in submission to His will, as He outlined and commanded us what to do. So we declare in and through our humble worship, there is no other God in all the earth. Now I'm at that age where I grew up eating a lot of different salads that were never on the menu or are never on the menu anymore. And I don't know that I would really define them as salads, but they were trends of the times, and some I liked and others I didn't. But I never ever considered saying, "No peas for me, please." I never considered getting up from the table for a different vegetable, or that I wasn't going to eat with my family because I just don't like those peas. That corn is my preference. That sounds just absurd, doesn't it? I mean, I know. But it kind of applies. You see, I understood the menu was chosen by our mother, cooked and prepared by our mother. The food on the table was what my parents provided and is what we were expected to eat. And we were reminded every time in the family prayer that each and every dish, every kind of food that was on that table, well, that was a blessing from God. And God provided it for us to nourish our body in His service, even the peas. And it is for this. It is for this that I bow my knees with you together in humility and in submission to His will. Not mine, not yours, not ours, just His. It really is that simple.
We thank you for joining us today. We hope you have enjoyed this program. You can find out more about Byway Media by visiting us at bywaymedia.org. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find all of our podcasts on all major podcast platforms. As always, we thank you for listening.